Birthdays are supposed to be celebrations, not funerals for 30-year marriages. Yet here I sat, staring at divorce papers wrapped in silver gift paper, complete with a gaudy bow on top. David always did have a twisted sense of humor. I'm Elena, and my husband just told me he wants to start a new life without me on my 50th birthday. I think it's best if we handle this amicably, David said, his voice carrying that same measured tone he used when explaining complex legal cases to clients. I've spoken with my lawyer. He's drawn up a fair settlement. The restaurant buzzed around us, other diners laughing and clinking glasses. A waiter hovered nearby, probably wondering why the woman at table 12 was clutching unopened gift wrap like it might explode. Fair. The word tasted bitter. You ambush me at dinner and call this fair? David adjusted his collar, a nervous tic I'd noticed over 3 decades of marriage. I thought a public place would help keep things civil. Civil? I laughed, drawing stares from nearby tables. Like serving divorce papers for dessert was the epitome of civility. Lower your voice, Elena. People are starting to stare. Let them. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor. 30 years, David. 30 years of cooking your meals, ironing your shirts, supporting your career, and this is how you thank me? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. I've given you everything you could want. A beautiful home, financial security, everything. Except loyalty. The words shot out before I could stop them. His face tightened. This isn't about loyalty. We've grown apart. You must have noticed. Of course I'd noticed. The late nights at work, the mysterious business trips, the new cologne he'd started wearing 6 months ago. I wasn't stupid, just willfully blind. Is there someone else? David's silence was answer enough. Who is she? That's not important right now. He reached for his wallet, pulling out crisp bills. Let's not make this uglier than it needs to be. I stood up, my hands shaking. You're right about one thing, David. This doesn't need to be ugly. I picked up my water glass. It can be spectacular. The water hit his face before he could react, drawing gasps from nearby diners as it dripped down his expensive shirt. I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear in his eyes. Happy birthday to me, I said, dropping the empty glass on the table. And David, tell your lawyer to expect a call from mine. I walked out of that restaurant with my head held high, leaving behind 3 decades of marriage and a very wet, soon-to-be ex-husband. My phone buzzed in my purse, probably Sarah calling to wish me a happy birthday. Our daughter didn't know yet. Nobody did. In the parking lot, my composure cracked. Tears burned my eyes as I fumbled with my car keys, but I refused to let them fall. David wanted amicable. He should have thought of that before gift-wrapping my heartbreak. The divorce papers sat on my passenger seat, that ridiculous bow mocking me. I started the engine, my mind already racing with questions. Where would I live? What would I tell our friends? How would Sarah react? But beneath the fear and hurt, something else stirred. Something that felt dangerously like revenge. David thought he could discard me like yesterday's newspaper, start fresh with whoever she was. He thought I'd roll over, take his fair settlement, and disappear quietly. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving behind the restaurant where my marriage ended. Ahead lay uncertainty, fear, and pain, but also possibility. And perhaps, just perhaps, the sweet taste of justice. Happy birthday to me, indeed. Sarah's face twisted with rage as she paced my kitchen, her heels clicking against the tile like angry punctuation marks. He did what? I watched her from my seat at the counter, wondering how my daughter had grown into such a fierce defender. The divorce papers lay between us, that gaudy bow now crushed and forgotten. Your father thinks he's being generous, I said, tracing the rim of my coffee mug. He's offering me the house. The house you both own? How magnanimous of him. Sarah stopped pacing, her marketing executive persona slipping into place. What about his pension, the investments, the vacation property? According to these papers, those stay with him, for his retirement plans. Sarah's laugh could have cut glass. I'm calling him. Sarah, don't. But she already had her phone out, jabbing at the screen. The call connected on speaker, David's voice filling the kitchen. Sarah, I'm in a meeting. Cancel it. We need to talk about what you did to Mom. A heavy sigh crackled through the speaker. Your mother and I are handling this like adults. I'd appreciate it if you'd stay out of it. Stay out of it? Sarah's knuckles whitened around the phone. You served her divorce papers on her birthday, in a restaurant. It was a controlled environment. It was cruel, Dad. And the settlement? It's insulting. The settlement is more than fair. His voice took on that condescending tone I'd grown to hate. Your mother hasn't worked in 30 years. The house gives her security. The house gives you an easy out, Sarah snapped. What about the money you've been moving around lately? Those new accounts Mom doesn't know about? The silence that followed was deafening. I straightened in my chair, watching my daughter's face carefully. Lucas noticed some irregularities when he was helping you with your taxes last month, Sarah said, her eyes locked on the phone. Want to explain those, Dad? Your husband had no right to go through my personal finances. David's voice had lost its patronizing edge, replaced by something sharper. And you have no right to interfere in matters between your mother and me. Someone needs to look out for her interests, since you clearly aren't. I'm done discussing this. The line went dead. Sarah set the phone down carefully, too carefully. Mom, there's something you need to know. Lucas found... Not yet. I stood up, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. First, I need a lawyer. Then we can talk about what Lucas found. I have a name. Someone who specializes in high-conflict divorces. She pulled out a business card, sliding it across the counter. She's expensive, but she's the best. I picked up the card, running my thumb over the embossed letters. Your father will be furious if I challenge the settlement. Good. Sarah's smile was all teeth. Let him be furious. Let him see what happens when he underestimates you. Looking at my daughter, I saw myself at her age. Fierce, determined, ready to take on the world. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost that fire. Or maybe I'd just buried it under years of compromise and careful peacekeeping. There's something else, Sarah said, her expression softening. Lucas and I want you to stay with us until this is sorted out. The guest room's already made up. I couldn't impose. It's not imposing, it's family. She reached across the counter, squeezing my hand. Besides, it'll drive Dad crazy, knowing you're not sitting at home waiting for his next move. For the first time since that disastrous birthday dinner, I felt something like hope. David thought he had me cornered, relegated to the role of discarded wife, accepting whatever scraps he deigned to offer. He'd forgotten who I was before I became Mrs. David Anderson. Time to remind him. I picked up the divorce papers, noting how my hands no longer shook. Call the lawyer. Set up a meeting. I met Sarah's gaze, seeing my own determination reflected back. Let's show your father what happens when he mistakes kindness for weakness. The photograph landed on my lawyer's desk with the weight of a bomb. Lucas had found it buried in David's cloud storage. My husband and a woman I didn't recognize, intimately entangled at what looked like a hotel bar. The date stamp showed 3 months ago, during what David had called a critical business conference in Phoenix. Her name is Grace Miller, Lucas said, his usual calm demeanor tinged with disgust. She was a consultant at David's firm before he retired. 35 years old. The age hit me like a physical blow, 20 years younger than me. I stared at her glossy dark hair, her perfectly manicured hands on my husband's arm, the way she looked at him like he was her future. There's more, Sarah added, pulling out her tablet. She's been appointed to 3 different tech company boards in the last 6 months, companies David had connections with. My lawyer, Catherine Walsh, studied the information with sharp eyes. And the accounts you mentioned? Lucas pulled up several spreadsheets. David's been moving significant amounts into offshore accounts. Started about 8 months ago, right around when Grace Miller began her meteoric rise in the industry. He's been planning this, I said, my voice hollow. All those late nights, the business trips, the secret phone calls. He wasn't just having an affair, he was building her career with our marital assets. This changes everything, Catherine noted, typing rapidly. The settlement he offered isn't just unfair, it's fraudulent. A memory surfaced. David at our kitchen table, asking me to sign papers for what he called retirement planning. I'd trusted him completely, never questioning, never doubting. "What's our next move?" Sarah asked, her hand squeezing mine. Catherine's smile was predatory. "We file for emergency injunctions on all accounts, then we request a forensic accountant to trace every penny he's moved, and most importantly," she tapped the photograph, "we make it clear we know about Grace." My phone buzzed. A text from David. "We need to talk. Dinner tonight." "He knows we're here," I said, showing them the message. "He's trying to control the situation." "Good," Catherine replied. "Let him think he still can. Meet him for dinner, record everything. But first," she handed me a stack of papers, "sign these. We're filing them this afternoon." Later, at an upscale restaurant David had chosen, I watched him fidget with his wedding ring, the one he still wore, despite everything. His tell when he was about to lie. "Elena, be reasonable," he started. "This hostile approach isn't like you." "No." I sipped my wine, savoring the moment. "How would you know what I'm like, David? You've been too busy with Grace Miller to notice." The color drained from his face. "Who told you?" "Does it matter? What matters is what you've been doing with our money, our future." "I can explain. The board appointments, the offshore accounts, the hotel. Save your explanations for the forensic accountant." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You're making a mistake. I offered you a clean break, a comfortable life. Don't throw that away for spite." "Spite?" I met his gaze steadily. "No, David. This isn't spite. This is justice. You'll get nothing," he snarled. "I'll fight you every step of the way." "Like you fought for those board positions for Grace?" I stood, dropping my napkin on the table. "I wonder what the ethics committees would think about that." Fear flickered in his eyes. Real fear, like at my birthday dinner. But this time, I didn't just see it, I savored it. "You taught me something, David," I said, gathering my purse. "You taught me that sometimes the people we trust the most deserve it the least. I'll remember that lesson, and so will you." I left him there, staring at his untouched meal, knowing his perfectly planned future was unraveling thread by thread. In my purse, my phone recorded every word, every threat, every admission. The game had changed. David thought he was dealing with the same compliant wife who'd signed papers without reading them, who'd believed every lie, who'd put his needs first for 30 years. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. The email arrived at 3 in the morning, sent from an address I didn't recognize. One line of text followed by attachments. "You should know what you're up against." I clicked through photos of David and Grace at various events, each more intimate than the last. Then came the documents, bank statements, property records, incorporation papers. Grace's name appeared everywhere, woven through David's business dealings like a poisonous thread. My hands shook as I forwarded everything to Catherine. Sleep was impossible now, so I wandered into Sarah and Lucas's kitchen, where the midnight silence felt less oppressive than my temporary bedroom. "Mom?" Lucas appeared in the doorway, laptop under his arm. "I heard you up. Anonymous email?" "Someone's feeding us information," I said, gesturing to my phone. He set his laptop on the counter, pulling up files. "I've been tracking David's digital footprint. There's something else you need to see." The screen showed a real estate listing, a modern penthouse downtown, purchased 3 months ago through a shell company. The kind of place David always claimed was wastefully extravagant. "It gets worse," Lucas said quietly. "Check the move-in date, next week." The same week David had insisted we needed to finalize the divorce. "He's been planning this for months," I whispered. Years, maybe. There's more. Lucas hesitated. The shell company. Grace is listed as co-owner. The kitchen suddenly felt too small. I grabbed my car keys. Mom, where are you going? To see my house while it's still mine. Lucas grabbed his jacket. I'm coming with you. The drive was silent. Our family home emerged from the darkness, its familiar outline now seeming false, like a stage set hiding ugly truths. My key still worked. Inside, everything looked normal. Family photos, collected memories, 30 years of life together. But something was off. The study, I realized heading upstairs. David's private space had always been off limits, his sanctuary for work, he'd called it. Now I knew better. The door was locked, but Lucas made quick work of it. Inside, David's usually immaculate desk was chaos, papers everywhere, drawers left open. He's been here tonight, Lucas said, examining the mess, looking for something specific. I started sorting through papers, muscle memory from years of organizing David's life taking over. Bank statements, investment records, a half-empty bottle of expensive scotch I'd never seen before. Then I found it, buried under tax forms, a handwritten letter from Grace. David, everything's ready. The boards are secured, the accounts are clean. After the divorce, we'll have full control. She'll never know how long we've been planning this. All your careful grooming of me is about to pay off. The words blurred. I sat heavily in David's chair, the leather still warm from his recent presence. Mom? Lucas's voice seemed far away. He didn't just betray me, I said, my voice strange to my own ears. He used me. All those years I supported him, managed his life, helped him climb the corporate ladder. I was just a stepping stone. Lucas gathered the papers quickly, taking photos with his phone. This is evidence Catherine can use. No. I stood up, something cold and clear crystallizing in my chest. Not yet. David's looking for these papers for a reason. They're valuable to him. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time to stop playing defense. I picked up David's scotch bottle, studying it. He taught Grace everything she knows about business, but he taught me everything about him. A car door slammed outside. Headlights swept across the windows. He's back, Lucas whispered. I grabbed the letter and key documents, leaving the rest scattered. Good. Let him wonder what's missing. Let him worry about what I know. We slipped out the back door as David's key turned in the front lock. In the car, Lucas looked at me with concern. Are you okay? I watched my house, David's house, disappear in the rearview mirror. No, but I will be, because now I know exactly what kind of game we're playing. And for the first time, I was ready to play to win. The art studio smelled of turpentine and possibility. Sarah had insisted I take these classes, claiming I needed something for myself. What she really meant was I needed somewhere to be that wasn't her guest room, obsessing over David's betrayal. Your strokes are too controlled, my instructor said, studying my canvas. Let go of the precision. Feel the emotion. Easier said than done. 30 years of measuring my words, controlling my reactions, being the perfect corporate wife, it becomes a habit. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Meeting at Riverside Cafe in 30 minutes. Come alone. G. Grace. My hands trembled, smearing red paint across the canvas like a wound. I need to go, I told the instructor, already reaching for my bag. The cafe was busy, a smart choice on her part. Public enough to feel safe, noisy enough for privacy. Grace sat at a corner table, looking exactly like her photos. Polished, poised, younger than my marriage. Thank you for coming, Elena. Her smile was practiced, professional. I thought it was time we met. I sat down, noting how she'd positioned herself to watch the door. Why? Because David is going to destroy both of us if we let him. That wasn't what I expected. Funny, from the letters I found, you two seemed quite cozy. Letters can lie. She slid a folder across the table. Like these board appointments he arranged for me. They come with strings and evidence of securities fraud. I didn't touch the folder. Why tell me this? Because he's setting me up to take the fall. Her perfect composure cracked slightly. The offshore accounts, the irregular trades, everything's in my name. When the SEC investigates, and they will, I'll be the scapegoat, while David walks away clean. The pieces clicked into place, with my money and your reputation. He's better at this game than either of us realized. She leaned forward. But together. Stop. I held up my hand. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. You helped him betray me. I did. No denial, no excuse. And now I'm helping you destroy him. Take the folder, Elena. Use it. My phone buzzed again, David this time. Where are you? We need to talk about the house papers. Grace's eyes flickered to the message. He's getting desperate. The SEC is starting their preliminary inquiry next week. I stood up, leaving the folder untouched. Handle your own mess. He'll win, she called after me. He always wins. Outside, the bottom air felt thick with possibilities. I called Catherine. Grace Miller just tried to make a deal, I said when she answered. Something about SEC investigations and fraud evidence. Don't touch anything she offers, Catherine warned. It could be a trap. I know. I watched Grace through the cafe window, seeing not a manipulative homewrecker, but another of David's carefully positioned pawns. But what if we let her think I did? That evening at my art class's open studio hours, I stood before a fresh canvas. The instructor's words echoed, "Let go of the precision. Feel the emotion." I thought of David's betrayal, of Grace's desperation, of 30 years reduced to legal documents and hidden accounts. My brush moved without conscious thought, spreading dark colors across the white space. "Mom?" Sarah's voice was behind me. "That's intense." I stepped back, seeing my pain through her eyes. Chaos and anger and pain made visible, not precise, not controlled, not safe. "David called me today," Sarah said quietly. "He's worried about you, says you're not thinking clearly." I laughed, harsh and genuine. He should be worried, but not about my clarity. My phone lit up with another message from Grace. "Time's running out. What's your answer?" I studied my painting, all that contained rage finally breaking free. Then I typed, "Meet me tomorrow, same place, bring everything you have." "Mom?" Sarah touched my arm. "What are you planning?" I picked up my brush again, adding one final streak of red across the canvas. "I'm done being a pawn, sweetheart. It's time to play like a queen." The paint looked like blood in the studio's harsh lights. Good. Because one way or another someone was going to bleed. The boardroom at Catherine's law office felt like a tomb. David sat across from me, Grace beside him, both wearing expressions of practiced concern. The SEC documents lay between us like landmines. "This is a mistake, Elena," David said, his voice carrying that familiar patronizing tone. "You're letting emotion cloud your judgment." I studied the man I'd loved for 30 years, searching for any trace of the person I thought I knew. Emotion? Like the kind that made you forge my signature on those transfer documents? His facade cracked slightly. "That's a serious accusation." "Everything in these files is serious." I pushed the documents toward him. Securities fraud, money laundering, creative accounting that would make Bernie Madoff blush. Grace shifted uncomfortably. David's hand twitched toward hers, then stopped. The gesture wasn't lost on me. "You're still trying to protect her," I said quietly. "Even now, when she's helped me build this case against you." His head snapped toward Grace, who paled visibly. "What?" "Don't act surprised, David." My voice stayed steady, though my hands shook under the table. "Did you really think she'd take the fall for you? That she'd sacrifice herself for love?" "Grace?" His voice held a dangerous edge. She straightened, masks slipping into place. "It's business, David. You taught me that." The look he gave her could have frozen hell. Then he smiled, that same smile he'd worn when serving me divorce papers on my birthday. "Interesting play," he said, standing. "But you've overlooked something crucial." He pulled out his phone, tapped briefly, then set it on the table. "Check your email, Catherine." My lawyer frowned, opening her laptop. Her sharp intake of breath made my stomach drop. "What is it?" I asked. "He's filed a countersuit," Catherine said slowly, "alleging you knew about and approved all financial transactions, with documentation." "Impossible." "The renovation contracts," David cut in smoothly, "the charity board minutes, all those papers you signed without reading, trusting your loving husband to handle the details." His smile widened. "Your signature's on everything, darling, and unlike mine, they're all authentic." The room spun slightly. All those years of blind trust, of signing whatever he put in front of me, of playing the supportive wife. "You'll go down with me," I managed. "No, Elena, I'll weather this storm, with my young, naive protege who was led astray by my manipulative soon-to-be ex-wife." He gathered his papers carefully. "The board members know me. They'll believe what's easier to accept, that a bitter woman is seeking revenge, not that their trusted colleague orchestrated fraud." Grace sat frozen, her ambitious future crumbling visibly. "You're bluffing," I whispered. "Try me." He headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, and Elena, the art studio called. They're concerned about your recent, aggressive works. Apparently my worried calls about your mental state made quite an impression." The door closed behind him with a terrible finality. "He's thought of everything," Grace said numbly. "He always does." Catherine was already typing frantically. Damage control mode engaged. But I barely heard her strategy suggestions. All I could see was David's smile, the same one he'd worn at our wedding, at Sarah's birth, at countless dinner parties where I'd played the perfect corporate wife. My phone buzzed. Sarah, asking how the meeting went. I couldn't answer. Couldn't tell her that her father had just outmaneuvered us all. Couldn't admit that 30 years of trust had become the weapon of my own destruction. "What do we do now?" Grace asked, looking as lost as I felt. I stood up, legs unsteady. "I need air." In the hallway, I caught my reflection in a window. Gray-streaked hair, lines earned from years of smiling at David's jokes, wearing David's choices, being David's wife. My phone buzzed again. A text from David. "The house papers need your signature by tomorrow. Let's not make this messier than it needs to be." I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching the city below continue its normal rhythm, unaware that my world was imploding. Then I straightened, remembering my latest painting. Chaos and rage and something else. Something that looked like freedom. David had thought of everything. Almost everything. The annual tech industry gala buzzed with artificial cheer, a perfect stage for what was about to unfold. I adjusted my black evening gown, the one David always said was too bold, and watched him work the room, Grace at his side like a trophy. Lucas appeared beside me, champagne in hand. The USB drive is planted in his laptop. Sarah's got the presentation queued up. I checked my phone. One new message from Catherine. "SEC team standing by. Give the signal." David caught my eye across the room, his smile faltering slightly. He excused himself from his group, making his way over. "Elena, I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm still on the charity board, David. Remember all those papers you had me sign?" His jaw tightened. "We should talk privately." "Actually," I gestured to the stage, "I believe you're about to give your retirement speech. Don't let me keep you." He studied my face, searching for tells he'd learned over 30 years. I gave him nothing. The chairman called David to the stage. Applause rippled through the room as he took his position behind the podium, Grace beaming from the front row. "Distinguished colleagues," he began, "after 30 years in this industry." The presentation screen behind him flickered. His carefully prepared slides disappeared, replaced by financial documents, email exchanges, and photos. All the evidence we'd gathered, now displayed for his peers to see. David faltered mid-sentence, turning to look. His face went ash-white. "Keep going, David," I called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Tell them about your retirement plans, the offshore accounts, the manipulated board appointments, the fraud you plan to pin on your mistress." Grace stood up sharply, her perfect composure cracking. "You said you'd protect me." "He lies, Grace. That's what he does." I moved toward the stage. "He used my signatures to build his empire, used your ambition to create his scapegoat, and thought he could discard us both when it suited him." Security guards appeared at the doors. Not hotel security, but SEC agents. David saw them too, his hands gripping the podium. "This is a mistake," he announced to the shocked crowd. "My wife is unwell." "Your wife," I cut in, "has been working with federal investigators for weeks. Those signatures you relied on. Every document dated after your affair began is now evidence of coercion in a federal fraud investigation." The room erupted in whispers. Board members stepped back from David like he was contagious. Grace slipped toward the exit, but found her path blocked by agents. "You can't prove anything," David hissed, but his voice shook. "Check your laptop, dear, the one you use for private trading." It's amazing what a forensic accountant can find with full access. His eyes widened. Finally, he understood. "You taught me well, David. All those years watching you manipulate people, watching you build your house of cards." I smiled his smile, the one he'd worn while serving me divorce papers. "I learned." The SEC agents moved in. Grace was already in tears, spilling everything to save herself. Board members huddled with their lawyers. And David. David stood frozen, watching 30 years of careful planning collapse. "The House papers," he said quietly, as agents approached the stage. "You never signed them." "No, I didn't." I removed my wedding ring, placing it on the podium. "Consider it my retirement gift to you." They led him away in handcuffs, past shocked colleagues and flashing phones, past Sarah, who stood straight-backed, her father's daughter in strength if not in character, past the life we'd built on lies and careful signatures. In the chaos, Lucas touched my arm. "You okay?" I watched David disappear through the doors, shoulders slumped, no longer the giant who had dominated my life. I thought this would feel more like victory. "Maybe it's not about winning," he said quietly. "Maybe it's about surviving." My phone buzzed. Catherine, confirming that everything was proceeding as planned. The legal machinery would grind forward, justice would be served, and I was free. The taste wasn't exactly sweet, but it wasn't bitter either. It tasted like truth, like strength, like tomorrow. The gallery hummed with opening night energy as visitors moved between my paintings. Each canvas told a piece of my story: rage, betrayal, rebirth, though the patrons saw only abstract emotion in bold strokes. "The series is called Signatures," I heard the curator explain to a group. "Each piece explores themes of identity and power." I touched the simple silver pendant at my throat, my first purchase with my own money after the divorce settlement. David's assets were frozen pending his trial, but my share had been secured, along with something far more valuable: my freedom. "That one's my favorite," Sarah said, pointing to a particular piece. Dark lines tangled with splashes of crimson, but at the center, a small spark of gold broke through. I'd painted it the day David's plea deal was finalized. "Mine too," I admitted, though I'm not sure why. She squeezed my hand. "It's the first one where you let the light in." A commotion near the entrance drew our attention. Grace stood there, looking less polished than during her testimony that had helped convict David. She spotted me and moved forward, ignoring the curious stares. "I wasn't sure you'd come," I said when she reached us. "I almost didn't." She studied the painting before us, the one where gold broke through darkness. The board positions. They fell through. All of them. I know. Was it worth it? Burning everything down? I considered her question carefully. "Ask me again in 10 years. She nodded, understanding what I couldn't quite say. We'd both lost and won in different ways. She turned to leave, then paused. David asked about you in prison. What did you tell him? That you're having an art show. A ghost of her old smile appeared. He wouldn't understand what that means, would he? After she left, Lucas appeared with champagne. Sold another one, the big piece from your angry period. I laughed, actually laughed. Is that what we're calling it? Better than the month Mom went nuclear on Dad? Sarah quipped. The curator approached, beaming. Elena, there's someone who'd like to discuss commissioning a series for their corporate offices. Go, Sarah urged. Be brilliant. I moved through the gallery, noting how differently I carried myself now. No more careful steps, no more measured words. The woman who had signed papers without reading them was gone. Near the back wall hung my latest work, still untitled. Unlike the others, its colors were neither dark nor light, but something in between, complex, uncertain, real, like life after revenge. My phone buzzed. A message from Catherine. Judge denied David's appeal. It's really over. Over. Such a simple word for such a complicated truth. A young woman stood studying my untitled piece, her expression thoughtful. I can't decide if it's about endings or beginnings, she said as I approached. I touched my silver pendant, thinking of David in his prison cell, of Grace rebuilding her life, of Sarah and Lucas's steadfast support, of my own reflection finally recognizable again. Maybe it's both, I replied. Maybe that's the point. She nodded slowly. The technique here, it's unusual. Like you're signing your name across the whole canvas, over and over, but in colors instead of letters. I smiled, remembering all those years of signing David's papers, of writing his name beside mine, of letting my signature become a weapon he wielded. Sometimes, I said, you have to sign your name 1,000 times before you remember who you are. The gallery lights dimmed slightly, a signal that opening night was winding down. Soon, Sarah and Lucas would take me to dinner, and tomorrow I'd return to my studio, where blank canvases waited. David had taught me about power, about signatures, about careful plans and hidden motives. But he'd never understood the most important lesson. Sometimes the strongest signature isn't written at all. Sometimes it's painted, in light breaking through darkness, in truth shattering lies, in the simple act of standing in a gallery, surrounded by your own voice, finally and fully heard. Story 2. I was 7 years old when it all started. My family led a tranquil, predictable existence, and was typical. While my mother, Sophia, balanced a part-time job and domestic responsibilities, my younger brother Ethan and I spent our days playing in the backyard. Dad Adrian frequently arrived home late from his lengthy work days. He was more like a passing shadow. Before that day, life was easy. From the front door, I recall hearing my mother's voice beckoning me frantically. Chloe, come on over here. This is something you must hear. She was radiant. She was holding Ethan's hands tightly. I sprinted over to her. I'm curious, yet perplexed. She dropped on her knees. She hardly controlled her eagerness. Your sibling? Is a musical genius, she replied, her voice faltering. He has excellent pitch, according to his instructor. Are you aware of how uncommon that is? Her passion was contagious, even if I didn't entirely comprehend. From then on, everything was different. Everything in our existence revolved around Ethan's piano classes. In order to devote herself fully to his developing skill, Mom resigned her work, converting our house into a little studio with a piano, sheet music stores, and microphones. She put all of her effort into organizing his calendar, which included both weekend events and everyday classes. Ethan flourished under her tutelage, and everyone who heard him was moved by his lovely, pure voice. Before long, he was becoming well known outside of our tiny town and winning local competitions. Mom was overjoyed. Every time she talked about him, her pride was evident. My Ethan will become a famous person, she would say. Dreams of his future were flashing in her eyes. However, I felt like I was receding into the background while Ethan starred Rose. Once split between us, Mom's attention now seemed to be exclusively for him. My accomplishments, a good test score and a diligently drawn picture, were greeted with brief, preoccupied praise. She kept returning her attention to Ethan. Dad, however, continued to be aloof. He was too worn out from his lengthy workdays to participate in the increasingly complicated affairs of our home. He sat quietly in front of the TV or hid himself in the garage when he was at home. He appeared happy to let Mom take care of everything, including our widening gap. I was able to support myself by the time I reached 10. I learned not to look to my parents for approval, cooked my own food, and finished my schoolwork by myself. I began to carry the pain of neglect in silence, turning to literature and my trips to Grandma Helen's bakery for solace. Grandma, in contrast to Mom, thought of me as Chloe, not simply Ethan's sibling. My darling, you're resilient and observant. As she was showing me how to knead dough, she would say, "Don't allow someone to diminish your significance." As Ethan reveled in his mother's full attention, her words turned into a lifeline. I held on to the little affirmations that made me feel good about myself. I had no idea that the silent power I was developing would one day help me overcome obstacles much bigger than I could have ever imagined. The distance between my world and Ethan's expanded like a chasm as I got older. As I moved through life in silence behind his shadow, he was the golden kid, lavished with opportunity and acclaim. Ethan, his lessons, his performances, and his future were the center of Mom's existence. I became the one who could handle things on her own and handle me. The afterthought. I turned to books as a haven and a way to escape the constant comparison. I lose myself in tales of tenacity and adventure, seeing worlds far different from mine. I found a small group of friends at school who provided me with the companionship I didn't have at home. We laughed and spoke about our dreams with them in the park or the library throughout the afternoons. Instead of being continuously eclipsed by the genius of others, I felt like an equal. Ethan and I had radically different treatment. As I traveled to our neighborhood school via public bus, Ethan was driven to a prominent school known for its music curriculum. Mom packed delicious lunches, fussed over his outfit, and frequently went with Dad to make sure he had all he needed for me. There were only quick farewells and reminders to get home on time. No such customs. However, Grandma Helen and her charming bakery on Maple Street saved my bacon. I'd go there every day after school. The aroma of freshly baked bread and pastries envelops me like a cozy embrace. There is my diligent worker. My grandmother would welcome me. Her kind grin was a comfort to my tired heart. It was more than a chore to assist her. It turned into something to be proud of. During peak hours, I would take over the cash register, wipe the counters, and set up the display. I felt appreciated for the first time, for my own efforts, not for the accomplishments of others. "Chloe, you're a natural." Grandma's eyes would sparkle as she spoke. "Without you, this business wouldn't function half as well." I was unaware of the depth of the gap that her words filled. Grandma considered my independence as a strength, whereas my mother saw it as a convenience. She gave me a little salary, which I carefully saved since I knew I would eventually need it for something significant. Her support and faith in me were the only things that prevented me from completely fading into oblivion. Ethan, meanwhile, flourished in the limelight. His name frequently appeared in local publications, and he played at recitals that attracted sizable audiences. Mom put his prizes on full display. Every word she spoke about him was laced with pride. Greatness is in his destiny. As if the rest of us were merely bystanders to his journey, she would frequently say. Even though I applauded Ethan during his performances, I couldn't help but feel jealous. I felt like I was being forgotten, even though it wasn't his fault, a supporting role in another person's narrative. But during the quiet times at Grandma's bakery, I started to understand that my value was independent of other people's opinions. I was gradually coming to establish my own course. As Ethan's success kept growing, our family's dynamics underwent a radical change. We had lost what little equilibrium we had. Ethan's career, his practices, competitions, and the never-ending barrage of auditions and interviews took up Mom's every waking moment. Music coaches, photographers, and fans flocked to our house to watch the prodigy in action, turning it into a center of activity. Even though I was invisible, I was there. Only when it was absolutely necessary was my presence acknowledged. Without hesitation, Mom threw her money and energy into Ethan's success. She arranged for private lessons, accompanied him to music festivals, and made sure he always had the greatest gear and attire for his performances. Everything else, even my little victories, seemed insignificant to her. When I told her about an award I received at school, or proudly displayed an essay I had worked hard on, her answers were aloof, almost robotic. "That's good. Chloe, good for you." She would say so before hurriedly leaving to attend to Ethan's next important function. Even Dad, who had always kept his distance, now seemed to find solace in focusing on Ethan's growing fame. He rarely spoke to me beyond the occasional house school, and was more often than not absorbed in work or the television. The little recognition I'd once received from him faded entirely, as he too succumbed to the gravitational pull of Ethan's talent at school. I maintained good grades and even joined the debate club, hoping to find a space where I could shine in my own right. Yet at home, my achievements felt meaningless. The family's conversations revolved around Ethan's upcoming auditions and the possibility of him attending a world-renowned music academy. My efforts to be seen to matter fell flat against the ever-growing wall of their expectations for Ethan. I still helped at Grandma's bakery, where I felt a flicker of purpose. "You're doing great, Chloe," Grandma would tell me as we kneaded dough together. But even her affirmations couldn't completely drown out the feeling of being sidelined. The distance between Ethan and myself wasn't simply about attention. It was a chasm formed by our parents' decisions. One that left me battling with my place in a household that seemed to have room for just one star. Ethan auditioned for the famous National Youth Choir, was the event that appeared to convert our family into a pressure cooker. Mom was pleased when the invitation arrived. A handwritten note from the choir's director, no less. She could not contain her enthusiasm, waving the letter about as though it were a golden ticket. "This is Ethan's opportunity," she remarked, "and chance like this might start him on the path to international success." Her delight was short-lasted, though, as we gathered around the kitchen table that evening discussing Ethan's trip to New York. The bills gradually mounted up. Flights, hotel accommodations, new performance clothes, and costs for the audition itself. "It'll be tight," Mom conceded, her voice laced with dread. "But we'll manage." Dad's face grew serious. "Leah." "We're already overburdened," he stated in a stern yet hushed voice. "We cannot continue to spend down our savings in this manner." Mom yelled, "This is for Ethan's future." Why even hesitate? It was not the end of their fight. I heard their muffled conversations coming from behind their closed bedroom door that night, as I was getting ready for bed. I drew nearer, listening intently. Not much has been saved for Chloe's college education. Dad stated it was clear he was frustrated. "What should we do if she asks for our assistance?" Mom retorted, "She's resourceful. Chloe is going to work things out. She does it every time." It hurt to hear those remarks. I silently retreated from the door as a knot formed in my throat. Ethan wasn't the only thing that came first. It was the belief that I wasn't deserving of or in need of the same degree of assistance. Resolved to disprove them, I immediately started saving for college. I started putting every dollar into a little ceramic piggy bank that Grandma had given me years prior, after she promised to pay me a fair rate for my assistance at the bakery. Regardless of my parents' support, or lack thereof, every penny and every crinkled bell seemed like a step toward safeguarding my future. The stress at home continued for months. Even though Denise Ethan wowed the judges at his audition, the financial burden had an impact. I keep my piggy bank tucked away in a closet corner and make an effort to remain goal-focused. I made the decision to check my funds one day after I got back from Grandma's bakery. I was curious to see how much I had amassed. However, I felt uneasy when I took up the piggy bank. It weighed far less than it ought to have. I shook it, my pulse racing. But instead of the frenetic clatter of money, I heard a spooky quiet. My worst suspicions were validated when I busted it open. It was deserted. I sat there in shock, feeling a wave of betrayal and incredulity. Who was able to accept it? My first thought was of my mother. Had she stolen my money to pay for Ethan's audition? My stomach turned at the notion. That night, my voice trembling with rage, I faced her. "Did you steal my funds, Mom?" Before acknowledging that it was for Ethan's vacation, she hesitated for an excessive amount of time, and her face gave away. "We had no other option, Chloe. I was stolen from by you." I spoke in a hurtful tone that was just above a whisper. "Stop being so dramatic," she yelled. "It's all for Ethan's future and the family. You'll comprehend eventually." However, I didn't comprehend. I only experienced the piercing pain of betrayal. Without my permission, my hard-earned funds and any remaining faith in my parents had been stolen. The decisions made by my family weighed heavily on me that night, as I sat by myself in my room, leaving a deep ache in its wake. It was a sad day when I received my acceptance letter to college. I had obtained a partial scholarship and been accepted to the public university to study economics. Even yet, receiving the scholarship seemed like a win. It was not comprehensive. Living expenses, textbooks, and tuition were still factors to take into account. One evening after supper, I went up to my parents, determined to make things work. "Mom? Dad?" I started to grip the letter firmly. "I've received a state university acceptance. Although I received a scholarship, I will require assistance to cover the remaining expenses." Dad looked over the edge of his newspaper at me. He scowled. "That's fantastic news, Chloe," he remarked, but his voice seemed unenthusiastic. "It's tight right now, but you know." "Tight?" With a sinking heart, I echoed. "Mom, what about the money you saved for my college education?" Occupied with cleaning the table, scarcely raised his head. "The majority of that is used in Ethan's music school. Chloe, you'll have to work it out. You're resourceful." Despite the usual hurt of their remarks, I was able to nod stiffly and excuse myself. I laid in bed later that night, feeling a deep pain of disappointment. Any expectation of financial assistance from them was obviously pointless. I didn't give up, though. I even got a part-time job at the college cafeteria and took on extra shifts at my grandmother's bakery. I put every dollar I made toward my mounting list of bills. Grandma did everything she could to help me. Her constant support was a lifeline. "Chloe, you're going to succeed." With conviction, she would say. My mother unexpectedly showed up at my apartment a few months into my first semester. Her hands were wringing uneasily, and she appeared nervous. "I need your help, Chloe," she said. Her voice wavered. "I need to borrow some money because of an emergency." After some hesitation, I gave in and moved a sizable amount of my savings to her account. She told me it's for something significant. "I'll reimburse you as soon as I can." As the weeks went by, the cost of tuition and rent began to drain my bank account. Mom's tone changed when I asked her for repayment. "It's family money, Chloe." "Disregardfully," she said. "Ethan's future demands sacrifices, and you're not in immediate need." She said something that was like a slap. At that moment, I recognized that the emergency had been another of Ethan's musical endeavors. I was deeply hurt by the betrayal, and for the first time, I felt a burning rage inside of me. Grandma encouraged me to get legal counsel. She said firmly, "Chloe, this isn't just about the money. It's about advocating for oneself." Armed with text messages and bank statements that amply demonstrated Mom's dishonesty, I filed a case. They were bizarre court proceedings. In months, for the first time, I turned to face Mom. She had an angry and defiant look on her face. Ethan avoided looking at me as he sat quietly in the back. As soon as my lawyer presented the evidence, Mom's made-up account of a family emergency came to an end. The judge gave me a favorable ruling, directing Mom to pay my legal fees and return the money plus interest. I had won, but it didn't feel real. The consequences were severe and quick. Mom portrayed herself as a victim on social media. An unappreciative daughter betrays her mother. I was inundated with angry and disappointed messages from relatives who had only heard her side of the story. "You have brought shame to our family." One aunt gave a reprimand. "How could you do this to your mother?" Despite the backlash, I stood firm. Grandma's unwavering support kept me grounded. Her voice served as a continual reminder that I made the correct decision. Let them talk. She'd say the truth will always come out in the end. Though the familial bonds were shattered, I felt a newfound strength. I had fought for myself and my future, and no amount of criticism could take that away. Several weeks after the court ruling, I received an unexpected call from Dad. His voice, hesitant yet heartfelt, shocked me. "Chloe, may we talk?" he asked. "I've read your mother's posts, but I want to hear your side of the tale." We met at a little cafe near my flat. The discussion difficult at first. Slowly, I recounted everything throughout the years of feeling disregarded, the sacrifices I'd made, and the treachery that led to legal action. Dad listened quietly, his face darkened with remorse. "I failed you," he said, his voice husky. "I felt supplying financially was enough, but I neglected what was occurring at home. I let your mother take the reins, and I understand now how much you've suffered because of it." His remarks evoked a combination of emotions: fury, despair, but also a gleam of hope. For the first time, Dad wasn't distant. He was there, acknowledging the anguish I had held for so long. Dad started looking into the family's finances because he was determined to set things right. We were both astonished by what he discovered. For many years, Mom had been transferring money out of their joint account to support Ethan's interests while ignoring household bills, and even taking out loans in both of their names. He shook his head and remarked, "I should have paid more attention." I had complete faith in her. He was enraged, yet determined by the realization. In an effort to start again and provide me with the kind of support he had never provided before, he filed for divorce. Dad's apologies and acts signaled the start of our reconciliation, even if they didn't change the past. I felt like I had a parent who genuinely cared for me for the first time in years. We started working together to reestablish the connection we had both desired but had never known how to achieve. Our family's already shaky roots were rocked by the sudden revelation of Ethan's voice impairment. He strained his voice too far during a concert on top of a cold mountain, which caused a serious illness in his throat. Even with the greatest medical attention, the harm could not be undone. Ethan was no longer able to sing. Mom's entire world fell apart. Her son, on whom she had centered her whole existence, had become less brilliant. Mom hid herself in her room the day the doctors verified Ethan's illness, and there was a spooky silence in the house. She became unidentifiable, confused, and muttering about unrealized potential and dashed hopes over the next few weeks. Her neighbors asked for assistance one evening when her sorrow erupted into frenzy. After being diagnosed with a serious nervous breakdown, she was taken to a mental health facility. Ethan spent months in a depressive state due to his sadness and remorse. He distanced himself from everyone and used beer to numb his suffering. Dad and I made an agonizingly slow effort to draw him out of the shadows. Ethan finally started to come out of the shadows following months of treatment and recovery groups. "I can no longer sing, but I can still teach," he stated one day over coffee. "Without the pressure I had, perhaps I can assist others discover their passion for music." I noticed a glimmer of purpose in his eyes for the first time in years. After enrolling in a teaching program, Ethan went on to teach choir at a nearby school. "This is my second chance," he said quietly, resolutely. Despite the unexpected turn in life, Ethan's path to recovery provided a feeling of closure. His salvation demonstrated that one may get back up and start over even after falling. In retrospect, I can see how our family's divisions molded each of us. By inspiring people to embrace music without the burden of expectations, Ethan discovered a purpose beyond celebrity. Dad took charge and became the encouraging father I had always wanted. Despite being damaged, even Mom started the mending process. For my part, I carved myself a path based on self-worth and resilience after discovering my own abilities. I learned from life's hardships that suffering frequently leads to development, and even if the scars are still there, they serve as a reminder of my progress. Ultimately, I come out stronger, smarter, and more prepared to take on whatever is ahead.